Good evening. Tonight we have other update from the battlefront here, and our friends at the Austrian Armed Forces, or better that Theresian Academy, Colonel Markus Reisner, he makes these updates on their website, and they were so far in German. And to my delight today, he did an update actually in English. So they have the German and English version, two videos. I will post the link to this video from Colonel Reisner in my, not in the comment section, but in the description for the video. So I would encourage you, if you want to have all the details, because he gets really into the details on the exact troop movements at the battlefield on a very minute detail. Whereas I'm more concerned with the overall strategy, what I'm discussing here. I didn't want to do a deep analytics of, a town by town or street by street or house by house kind of fighting analysis here on my channel, because I don't have the technical resources to put something like that together. So if you go to Colonel Reisner's video, he is with the Austrian Armed Forces. That's the correct word. I have a little paper here. I wrote this down so I don't forget all these names. I'm not really retarded, but I have a lot of things going on, and I have to remember a lot of stuff. So with age, it becomes a little bit more difficult to remember things, and I've never been good at remembering names to begin with. So whenever I don't see someone on a constant basis, then I know the face and I can put a name together. I had that for a very long time. I've always been like this. I have... like I said, it's with my business and everything else, I have to remember a lot of things. So my mind is primarily preoccupied with these things. And that's why, with the equipment numbers and stuff like this, and sometimes I just can't remember that. Or in the other video with the names, there's of the court martial. So I will, if I can remember a name in a video, I will just post it in the description of the video below. So then you can actually read it to which person I referred. I did that in the last two videos, but I thought I'm going to point this out. Now, what Colonel Reisner was able to do is he actually obtained a picture of the first American M777 howitzers on the battlefield in the Ukraine. And there's an interesting development which we haven't really been told directly by the governments, whether it's the United States government or the Europeans, with the supply of Western weapons. What is clear now from the pictures when Colonel Reisner analyzed this is that the howitzers, the M777s, which were sent over just recently from the United States to the Ukraine by the U.S. military, are modified. And they are modified in such a way that the U.S. military has taken off a platform which is mounted to the side of the cannon, the left-hand side of the cannon, in order to prevent the Ukrainians to use certain ammunition, which allows them to use the full distance of what these artillery cannons can fire at. So they won't be able to fire into Russian territory. And this is something I pointed out in my last battle update, where I had the map actually, and I showed you this, that if they came around on the backside on that northern flank through the Russian territory, through the Russian homeland, the Ukrainian forces, they would probably be able to cut off the supply lines. None of this has actually happened, and I don't understand why, but I guess the Ukrainian military high command has a reason for this. Now, the reason why they have not done this yet, we will see, but the reason why the Americans have modified the howitzers, and this is exactly that goes back to the thing with these vehicles, these multi-rocket launcher systems they wanted to send over there. And they're going to send now the other ones over because they can modify and limit the range of those. So they won't be able to shoot from a fairly safe distance into Russian territory. That seems to be the turning point where Putin possibly could declare war, against NATO or the United States or any one of them, if that was the case. So all these Western weapons are short range in nature to avoid any possible conflict for the Ukrainian army to actually hit the home turf of the Russians. If this is now a good thing or a bad thing, I can't really tell you that from a political point of view and whether the Russians are going to get involved in this or not. But I can tell you for sure, for a battlefield environment, that is not your optimum if you're trying to defend your country. And this goes back to the supply lines of the Russians. So the entire back region around the Donbass is all Russian territory. So the Russian military can easily resupply their troops on every battlefield they got going right now in the central Donbass region, which they're encircling. And that pincer movement they're making is coming along, but it has had its challenges for the Russians, and the Ukrainian army is pretty well adapted to this. They're doing a pretty good job defending this. However, my concern as a as a commander in this would be the undisrupted supply side from the Russians. And like I said in my video where we looked at the map, I would have come in from that region of Charkiv. I would have broken through into the Russian border and then would have come around in a 180-degree move to get back into the Ukraine through Russian territory. And while I'm at it, I would have disrupted, bombed basically railroad lines, bridges, and everything else in the greater region over there to disrupt the resupply of the Russian army, because you have to disrupt this at one point or another with whatever means necessary, basically. Otherwise, you're probably going to stand to lose the war. That is my overall, impression on this. And Colonel Reisner also posted some video of troop material movement, equipment movement by railroad in Russia coming into the Donbass region. And this is now primarily M62 tanks, the older ones, and some newer ones, M80s. And what I think is what the Russians are doing now is they're bringing the M62s in. So the Ukrainians are going to shoot up all the Javelin missiles until they run out on the old tanks. And then they won't, the M62s, the armament is not as thick as on the M80s or on the M72s. So the Javelins, they actually should save the Javelins and use another type of anti-missile device or anti-tank device, on these older M62s. So they have the Javelins for the M80s and the T-72s and T-80s, which have a thicker armament. If they're going to waste all of their Javelins on the M62s, and they're going to be burned out, and the Russians then come in with the T-80s, with the newer tanks, with the better tanks, and they have no more, and the Ukrainians have no more Javelins missiles left, then they're going to run into a real issue. And like I said, I do not know what the supply side from the Americans look like it. But it would be vital to disrupt, starting to disrupt Russian supply lines. I would go probably as far as 100 to 200 miles into Russia as a commander, as a Ukrainian commander, and would take out primarily all railroad junctions, anything that has to do with railroad, because it is so much more difficult to move tanks, especially heavy tanks, on roads and over bridges because of weight restrictions and that sort of stuff. And that makes it a very cumbersome process to move a lot of equipment fairly quickly in there. So I would focus on the entire railroad system of the Russians in probably a 200-mile range, at least from the border, because that's where this is stuck. And most tanks, the Russian tanks, don't have a fuel capacity large enough to drive on their own the last 200 miles from wherever the rail is disrupted, where they would have to be unloaded into the terrain, and then, they would have to basically move on their own. That gets very, very tricky because these tanks, all of these tanks, use a tremendous amount of diesel per hour or per mile, per kilometer, and that makes it very difficult. Plus, to the terrain and weight restrictions on bridges and stuff like this, you cannot easily travel over every road with these heavy tanks. The M62s have an advantage because they are somewhat lighter, but the T62s and the T80s, they are much heavier, and so you're going to run immediately into problems. The same with the T72s. So this would slow down their entire operation tremendously. This wouldn't, jeopardize any people, Russian citizens or what have you. I would refrain from bombing any of that type of stuff. But this would be a operation I would get underway if I was on the Ukrainian side as quickly as possible, by any means necessary, to stop this. Now, if we're looking at the Donbass region itself, around these, I forgot now the names of the towns. I didn't want to write this down because I can't even pronounce half of them. That is a central region right now where the main fighting is happening, where that pincer movement is taking place. According to Colonel Reisner, there's approximately 10 to 15,000 packs over there. So that would be about 5 to 10 battalions in that, roughly in that size. And those are the troops which are, exposed to being cut off once that pincer starts to close down. And the Russians have been making pretty good progress. They have made better progress from the southern flank than from the northern flank. And like I said, if you watch Colonel Reisner's video, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. The interesting part is when they took over that city, the southern city, the Ukrainian forces were placed on the front line. The regular army was defending the city, and the two side flanks were protected by the National Guard, which was not as well equipped or trained. And that's how the Russians actually broke through, was through the side flanks. And I found that interesting when Colonel Reisner pointed this out, because this is exactly what the Red Army did with Stalingrad. The 6th Army was basically marching straight to Stalingrad in the actual battle for Stalingrad when they started to get in there. And they had the right flank and the left flank protected by the Romanian and the Italian allies. And both of those flanks, because the Wehrmacht didn't give much thought to this, were not as well equipped, and the soldiers were not as well trained. So they went for the head-on battle into Stalingrad. And what happened, and the encirclement happened exactly the same way. Once the 6th Army went in there for the better part, that's when the Red Army came around and broke through the flanks on the Italian side. I think the northern flank was Italians or the Romanians. Romanians' northern flank and the Italians' the southern flank, and that's how the encirclement happened. If the two flanks would have been protected, the 6th Army would have never gotten encircled. And the war would have taken a pretty much a different turn. And that's why I said this. It is very interesting to see how the Ukrainian high command actually is conducting themselves. And a lot of these things, the way they have planned this out, is very much either NATO strategy or it is the old Wehrmacht strategy. And they obviously have not learned anything from the tactics the Red Army employed during World War II in a lot of instances. And on the southern flank, we basically saw an exact repeat of Stalingrad in that sense. So this is kind of what I wanted to share with you. Now, I wanted to touch the point again on those because it is a very difficult thing with these modified weapons now, as it turns out. I would guess that the Western politicians were honest enough with the Ukrainian politicians, with Zelensky and the Ukrainian high command, that they told them that these weapons would be modified. So they couldn't, employ long-range shelling to prevent this, basically. If the Western world did not share this with them and they sent these modified weapons over there, that would be a pretty bad thing, from a humanitarian point and for a trust environment, especially for a country which would like to join the European Union, in this. We have a self-interest we have to protect. We don't want to get the Russian Federation the impression that we're directly fighting, or NATO is fighting them, or the NATO allies, the NATO countries are fighting directly Russia. If this can be accomplished by modifying weapons, that is debatable, I would say. I feel right now, as a military person, deeply saddened for the Ukrainian people, because it disables them to a certain extent to be able to fully defend themselves. This is like you're giving someone a Maserati, but you're putting a governor control on it 55 miles an hour, even the car can drive 200. And this is so typical Democrats and socialists. They always know what's best for you, and of course they have a self-interest in it to protect themselves. So I don't want to deny that part. That is a critical part in there. That is a pretty gray area, this whole thing. And of course, as a military person, I rather would like to see the Ukrainian army or the Ukrainian forces to be able to fully defend their country and give them every single assistance they possibly could use. But here we're dealing on the Russian Federation side with a nuclear power. From a military fighting point now, in a conventional war, that doesn't look very good. I can tell you that much. This is not much of a great second world power, so behind the United States, of what they have demonstrated so far here in the battlefield for being a superpower. But they have nuclear weapons, long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles and stuff like this. So if they feel that they're losing, what they got already doesn't look good at all in terms of the performance of their military personnel. If the political leaders feel that they're pushed too far in the corner and there might be an uprising in Russia itself, then that could lead potentially to a nuclear war, or at least that is possible, that they may feel pushed that far and they may deploy nuclear weapons. I don't think they may not go to biological weapons or chemical weapons, but the nuclear option is definitely on the table there. Even though the Russians have said, the government has said that they would not do this, they would only do this if they were attacked by nuclear power, which I seriously doubt we're not gonna do from the Western world out. Not if we send modified weapons over to the Ukraine, then you definitely won't see that kind of stuff. That will be the last thing, because we're trying not to get the Soviet Union confronted too much in this. And this is really the overwhelming thing in this is, if this is the danger in this for the supporters of the Ukraine, is that the repercussion might be of a nuclear, uh, answer from the Russian Federation. That's possible. If you push someone too far into the corner, they may come back really hard. And so this is what makes this entire war such a difficult thing. I've been accusing Scholz of a song and dance, which it is. But you could be more clearer about these things and explain to people of what you want to do and what you don't want to do. If we say, then we would also have to tell the Ukraine that the military assistance we're giving them is very limited in range, firepower not necessarily, but in range. And then you hope that the Ukrainians gonna find a way to actually cut these supply lines from the Russians on their own, with their own weaponry, which they have. They have developed quite a few weapons. They have quite a defense industry over there. I mean, they can send stuff out. But we have not seen any of the stuff. And war is war. Peace is peace. It's two different stories, and how you look at it. Yeah, my main focus from the high command side would be the disruption of the Russian supply lines fairly deep inside of Russia already, to keep this away from the entire war region. And I would focus only on the railroad system. That is the only thing. If you do this out in open tracks and you bomb them multiple times, that is going to take the Russians quite some time to fix the railroad. And if you keep attacking that while they're repairing it, then you basically have disabled the entire rail network over there. And that will put you're buying time, and it will put relief into this whole thing. And, the actually interesting, it was the Ukrainian-Russian resistance fighters against the Nazis, the Wehrmacht. They went actually out at night, and they would, just use regular explosives like dynamite and blow up the rail lines, and then the railroad, the German railroad, couldn't get any further. They were stuck there, and then they had to get the engineering troops out to get the rails put back together, and then the train could go on. That happened frequently. So they may have to run covert operations inside of Russia. I do not know on how well and how easy that is possible, but this is something they have to think about it. You have to, sometimes we have to deploy a forward defense. That's what we're calling this. And this is what the West is really afraid of. In the 1980s, the NATO strategy was a forward defense. And that would have meant, of course, Germany was divided, East and West, and we had almost 2 million, 3 million troops on both sides combined, which, if a war would have broken out, which faced each other within like 2 miles. And the war would have happened right there where the border was. And the idea was to get as far as you could from West Germany into East Germany, into Czechoslovakia, into, that was Czechoslovakia, and then into Hungary from the Austrian side over there. That was the strategy, was primarily West and East Germany. So everything was focused over there. All the roads were kept open to the East German border from West Germany, that the autobahns could be closed down. So the American military, the French military, the German military, the British military, all the other NATO forces which were there, and of course the German Bundeswehr, could have moved as quickly as possible to the East German border, and they would have thrown everything against them they had in their arsenal to get into East Germany, run over East Germany, and then get into Poland. And that defense strategy was called a forward defense. And this is the defense now. This is why the West is so worried about it if the Ukrainians were trying to repeat this. But I don't think that they have the manpower or the equipment we had. Germany had 500,000 or 750,000 soldiers back then, the Bundeswehr. Today it's like 125, 150,000. It is a fraction of this. The Americans had 500,000 soldiers stationed in Germany, West Germany. There were 100,000 French troops. You had 100,000 or 200,000 British troops in Germany, in West Germany alone. So you had over 1.5 million active armed soldiers on guard in West Germany, in a country which is smaller than the Ukraine. And the same story was over in East Germany. The East German had 500,000 men, the East German army, and then you had 300,000 Russians there. The Red Army was there. So that gave you 800,000, and then the other Warsaw Pact, they had at a bare minimum in that little country 1 million soldiers available. There were at least 2 million to 3 million soldiers facing each other from the outermost points about 350 miles apart. And of course, closer to the border, as higher the concentration was. This is just to give you an idea. And that is part of why this is so difficult. Now, I would love to tell the Ukrainians, that we could give them this, what we want to give them. But like I said, as I operate here with what I'm saying, without any intelligence, classified material. So I do not have an exact understanding of what they have, what they don't have, and that sort of stuff. I have to go by with what is public knowledge or is publicly available through the internet. And I rely here heavily on the Austrian armed forces, which do that more every 2 weeks or so, giving their update. And that has been the most accurate so far. And it has also been the most detailed and also most neutral, because they're not really siding with either side. It's just a clear analysis of what is actually going on here. And this is actually what you need in a war. Propaganda we got all over the place, from the Russian side, from the Ukrainian side, from other outlets. Everyone is trying to portray this thing here going their way or their way. It's you cannot see really of what's really going on until you have a neutral view on this and a complete oversight, and then you can see what goes on and who got the upper hand and what. And everyone has an advantage and a disadvantage. We will see what they're going to come up with. But I thought I'm going to put this into the mix here. And I hope we're going to have some peace here sooner or later in this. But with the amount of equipment moving in from both sides, I would guess this is going to go on for a while. And I will be checking up with another battlefield update probably in a week, maybe in 2 weeks from now. And then either with map or without it. But again, I would strongly suggest to you that you watch the updates from Colonel Markus Reisner from the Theresian Academy in Austria. That is the Austrian Armed Forces. And with that, you have a great night.